welcome to Stop Now. Today we have a special guest, Julio, who is a immigration officer. And Julio, how you doing today?
I'm good. Was an immigration officer. I'm no longer as of
Former immigration
November
officer.
2021. Yeah, no longer an immigration officer for USCIS, Homeland Security. Correct.
All right, great. And we're really happy to have Julio join us. Julio is going to provide us some information, and we're going to talk about immigration. And so, Julio, why don't you start by telling us a little about yourself?
Sure. So I'm prior military, prior Navy. I served for 4 years. After that, I did some time working for the Miami Veterans Hospital. Um, I worked with them for a couple of years. Then I eventually got into Homeland Security. Um, I started as a immigration services assistant, which is kind of like a paralegal for immigration, and then I eventually became an officer level one, and then an officer level two, which I worked at four different field offices, primarily working on family-based cases, so spousal petitions and family-based petitions.
What's the difference between the level one and level two?
So the immigration officers level one, they usually work the triage areas, the info pass areas. They don't typically interview too much. Um, so basically, if somebody needs just some quick questions, they'll make a they'll make what's called an info pass online, and then they'll go into their local office and they'll ask the immigration officer level one the question. A lot of times they go in for what's called an added stamp, which is kind of like an extension of their residency. Let's say their resident card expired and they already applied for a renewal. They already received a receipt from USCIS saying that the petition that their renewal for the green card is already in process, but in the meantime, while they get the card, it takes some time. So while they wait for the card, they can just go in to the local office with an info pass, and they can get what's called an added stamp in their passport. And that added stamp is basically is just as good as a green card. And so that'll usually be valid for a couple months to give them some time for the actual card to get to them.
Good. In the previous call that we had, you mentioned some very unique cases there that some of the most extreme cases that you mentioned that people are actually renting babies to come into the office. Could you tell us a little about
So
that?
So not to the office. That's usually so I did some time with Customs and Border Protection, working in the detention centers. And after working there, from I saw firsthand, and I saw from speaking to the CBP officers, Customs and Border Protection officers, that there were actually people that were renting, like literally renting children or renting toddlers, because they knew that if you go in with a toddler or a child, they knew that they have more of a chance. Well, basically, it's automatic that they were going to be able to stay and have some time to process to do an asylum application. Usually, a lot of times, if they come in alone and they look physically fit, there's nothing wrong with them. They'll just a lot of times, many times, just get booted. So they know that, and so yeah, a lot of times they'll literally rent a child from somebody who needs the money, and they'll bring it across the border, and they'll bring it to the CBP officer um, when they cross, and they'll be like, "Yeah, this is my child. Please give us asylum." And then they're because these asylum applications are taking years. It can take up to 10 years to process. So in the meantime, they're basically given, after 6 months of applying for the asylum application, they can basically apply for a work permit, and then they can work legally, um, get a driver's license, get a social security number, and then they'll renew every couple of years for their work permit until their asylum case comes up with an immigration judge. And again, these cases are so backed up. And now with things, all these people crossing the border, who knows how long it's going to take for these immigration judges to be able to get to these cases. So they can potentially just be in the States working, legally, for years, until that immigration judge actually gets to the case, and is able to adjudicate it.
How backed up are they?
Again, the asylum cases, I can't really tell you how much it fluctuates, but the asylum cases can take up to 10 years. And they usually, they're not quick. They're, from my experience, it's usually like 5, 6 years or something like that, a minimum, at a minimum, and that's quick. So they usually take some time. Another thing that the people do with, when crossing the border is they'll act as cross dressers. So they'll be a completely a straight guy, and he'll dress up as a cross dresser and say that he's a cross dresser, or say that he's gay, because they know, the CBP officers know that, in many of these countries they get persecuted for being gay or being cross-dressers or whatever. So again, that gives them an avenue to get a asylum application.
How commonly does this happen?
I worked there. I worked the border for maybe 2 months, 2.5 months, and I saw uh, quite a few people there. And the, I mean, I guess, you can't. There was no way of knowing that these children weren't really theirs, but these officers, these CBP officers, would ask them for documentation, birth certificates, or whatever. None of these people were able to supply that. But in these countries, a lot of them, the third world countries, or they're from, the like farm areas where these documents aren't really given to them. So at the end of the day, you don't really know. But some of them were children that were able to speak for themselves, and they themselves said, you know what, this is not my father, this is not my mother. And basically my parents gave me up because they needed the money. So yeah, that happened a couple of times while I was there. As far as the cross-dressing, that's just something I was told by the CBP officers. I never witnessed that myself.
Interesting. Well, what are the different types of immigration? Other than you mentioned the asylum cases, but
So I mean, there's all kinds. So usually the ones that I primarily work with was the family based. So it'll be like spousal petitions or family based petitions. So it'll be either an immediate family member, who's a citizen or a resident, and they petition for their non-citizen or non-resident family member. So many times it was a father petitioning for a son or daughter, mother, son or daughter, or their child who's over 21 can petition for their parents as well. Mostly what we got was, I think, spousal petitions, which is a U.S. citizen or a resident petitioning for their spouse, their non-U.S. citizen, non-resident spouse from a different country. Yep. That's
so how do
usually what
you,
I did with, huh?
go ahead if you're not finished.
No, that's usually what I dealt with. That's usually what the field offices deal with. Now, the service centers, they deal with employment-based applications. That's with if somebody wants to come over and they want to work legally from and they a lot of times they have some type of specialty. They're they're maybe they have a master's degree or a PhD, or they're maybe a celebrity or a professional athlete. They can get what's called an employment-based visa, um, and um, and so that those usually would go through the service center. So I never really dealt with those too much. Those are a little bit more complicated.
How do you become an immigration officer? What are the requirements?
Uh, you know what? I think that there was so many people from different backgrounds. Now, because I'm prior military, I you do get a certain amount of points towards federal jobs. So if just being military, you get, I think, 5 points. And then if you're a disabled veteran, then you get, I think, 10 or 15 points, depending on if you're 30% or below, 30% or below disabled, you get, I think, 10 points. If you're 30% or above, you might get 15 points. And so that it's that helps out in getting these federal positions. But I honestly I've seen people with no degrees, just experience working in other federal jobs, and they've been in there. So it's not like you have to have a certain level of education. If you have prior experience, maybe working in immigration, that could be, a good route, a good way to get in as well. But most of the people that were prior federal, they worked in other federal jobs, or they were prior military, or they worked with they worked overseas with I can't remember the folks that helped out, like poor countries. I can't remember these folks right now. I'm drawing a blank, but it's basically like kind of like join the military, but so you're basically you get stationed in a certain area of the world, which is very usually it was very very poor, and you could work as a teacher, or you could just work as just being a building manager, and helping out um, the people in the area with water. I don't know. They had all kinds of different jobs over there. I can't remember that specific, but there was a couple of people that I worked with that did that as well, and that got them points to be able to work as an immigration officer as well.
And what type of training do you get on the job? Are there any processes that you could share?
So when you get hired, they'll send you for training. They'll send you for training, and it's if I remember correctly, it's about 3 months. So about 3 months of training. They'll pay for your lodging. You'll go to an academy basically, and it's just it's kind of like school. You'll go to classes from like 9 to 5, and you have tests after each week, after each week. um and but the thing is that these classes they're open book. So um i I don't think it's good, because like knowledge goes in, and then it goes immediately out the door. So it's not good the way they do it. I don't think, at least. I think it would be better to do a closed book, but I think they want people to pass. And so, and that's why there's so many issues, I think, after they graduate, because all they really have to do is, no, not all they have to do. All most of us did was put in all the everything in a PDF, in a couple thousand page PDF. And then when we got to the online questions, we would just put Control F and then look for the specific answer. It was kind of a joke. And so after you get out, of there, you don't really know much. You learn on the job mostly. So it's kind of a waste of time and money, I think. Um, but yeah, a lot of these people, like I said, many people don't have any education. I saw people that could barely, write a well-structured paragraph. So, and that's why you have all these attorneys suing USCIS, because there's so many just terrible denials that don't make any sense, or and just a lot of profiling. And so yeah, there's a lot of issues.
Another member of our team there, Amar, has silently joined us. Amar, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. Yeah, nice to see you, Julio.
Nice to see you.
Is there any zoning for particular countries or particular regions in terms of immigration or categorization criteria, ways of handling certain countries differently from other countries?
So there's certain countries, because there's a lot more immigration from certain countries, so like India or China. So if you go to what's called a visa bulletin, you'll see the categories for these employment-based or just family-based. If eh, so for so let's say they're a resident and they apply for their, but let's say it's an Indian resident applying for their spouse. Now, as a resident, their visa is not readily available. If they were a citizen, the visa is available immediately. But because they're a resident, their visa is not readily available, and because they're Indian, then and there's so many immigrants from India, they they cap them. They cap each of these countries. Every country is capped. They'll have, but typically they'll specify China, India, and I can't remember the others. But and then they'll have other on there. But typically, India and China are the like more backlogged, and so there's the visas will take a lot longer.
So if let's say that somebody takes legal action against USCIS, if someone hires a lawyer and um, they they decide to sue an immigration officer or they try to sue the USCIS, what happens there? Would the
I
immigration?
mean, it's the government. It's the government. Immigration has Homeland Security, and well, each office has their own attorneys. So for these specific types of cases, that they're called mandamus cases, a lot of them. So when another attorney tries to sue USCIS or a specific field office, these attorneys that are usually staffed and work at these field offices, they they respond accordingly. So yeah, the government and Homeland Security, USCIS is very well equipped with lots of money and lots of attorneys to be able to, just uh, uh, protect themselves.
Is this a common occurrence?
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. It's especially as time goes on. There's a lot of lawsuits happening. So it is. I mean, I can't tell you percentage, but I worked at 4 different field offices, and this was, in my experience, it was definitely a regular occurrence.
And do you get stories from other colleagues regarding this type of thing, or um,
Yeah, it was like I said, it was a regular thing. So let's say, so each type of case has it's not really set in stone, but it has its set of time where you kind of have to wait. Now, if it gets past that specific set of time, then an applicant or an applicant's attorney can sue USCIS because the case is taking way too long. So, in pretty much, it's a high percentage of cases that take way too long. Like when I worked there, every officer was swamped. And then came COVID, and a lot of people were leaving, and it was a skeleton crew. I mean, it got really bad, and then we got really behind. So, you know, I don't know now. Maybe they caught up a little bit, but I highly doubt they're. I remember after COVID, because the government actually shut down for some time, as we were actually able to catch up a bit. But there's so much immigration on a daily basis; it's impossible to catch up. So it's just a given that these officers are swamped and overwhelmed, and that's why a lot of times they make the wrong decisions, because they're so they're forced to adjudicate cases so quickly. And can you imagine, like, most of the time, these residency cases, we would get 45 minutes to conduct the interview and adjudicate it. And a lot of times it would be fraud, or there would be criminal charges. So we would need additional information. I mean, it's sometimes some of these fraud interviews I would take 4 hours to complete. And then there goes, and usually on the residency interview days, we would have like 7 to 9 interviews that day. So if I took 4 hours, and then one interview is supposed to take 45 minutes, that's, that pushes all those other interviews behind. And some of them are, people are waiting, hours sometimes. And sometimes because they have to wait so long, they'll be like, hey, you know what? We can't get to your interview this day. We have to reschedule you. And then we'll reschedule them like months later. So it's nothing that they do. It's just, it's on the office, and it's on the officer. A lot of officers, they work slower, especially the older officers. Some of them, I saw officers that were typing like this, just, it was ridiculous. I worked at different offices, and then one of the countries that constantly came up was Nigeria. There was always investigations against Nigerians within USCIS, within the fraud FDNS. That's that's the fraud department of USCIS. And so because of that, anytime, I mean, it's sad, but pretty much every time that the Nigerian case would come across our desk, we would be like, okay, here we go. But you know what? Many times, unfortunately, at least in my experience, a high percentage were fraud. So, I mean, I tried my best not to profile. I tried to treat everybody the same, but like after years of experience, you kind of expect it, and so you might dig a little bit deeper, and yeah, many times it was fraud, unfortunately. So, but yeah, that's at least one country that's definitely profiled and definitely discriminated against, and that's why there's lawsuits, and there's been lawsuits, and I think there's current lawsuits against Homeland Security because they're discriminated against.
What happens when it's discovered that a case is fraud?
So, I mean, typically, what would happen is, I would we would just go down the course. So there's specific applications when you petition for a spouse. And most of the time, it's most officers do the same thing. We just go down the application and ask the questions that are on the application itself that they themselves should have completed. And if you don't know basic stuff like your spouse's full name, their date of birth, their country of birth, their family members' names, if they have family members, I mean, it was ridiculous some of the times. Like, believe it or not, I would ask these people, okay, what's your spouse's full name? And like they would just be like, oh no, that's my baby Chi Chi. Like his last name is Rodriguez, but I just call him Chi Chi. You know, stuff like that. It was ridiculous what you come across. So it's, you know, and they weren't able to say the person's full name, their country of birth. You know, sometimes they might be from some small town, so it's understandable that you don't know the town or maybe the city, but at least the country of the person that you've been with for years. And it's understandable again if you don't know their parents, but at least know that, you know, okay, well, you know, their parents reside in so and so country. They were born in so and so country, or if they're deceased or not, you know. Um, like that's pretty significant, you know. Um, or their occupation, your spouse's occupation. Like this is basic stuff. So if you don't know this stuff, which is on the application, which you should have filled out yourself, unless it was an attorney who filled it out for you, but you work with the attorney to complete these applications. So you should know all these questions. So then if you don't know all these questions, then it's a red flag. Then comes, like, usually we would have another list of questions for fraud, which would go deeper. You know, stupid stuff like, you know, okay, well, what did you eat this morning for breakfast? Uh, and then because, you know, if what did your spouse eat for breakfast? Because if they don't know what the other one, that means that they weren't uh, residing in the same place, possibly. Or sometimes we would ask them, hey, you know, well, how did you guys get here today? What car did you come in today? And like, why, if they say that they didn't come in the same car, like, why didn't you come in the same car? You should have come from home. This was a pretty significant event. You guys should have come together in the same car, unless he was at work and you were at work or whatever. Then you took different cars or something. You know, what did he get you for Valentine's Day, last Valentine's Day? What did you guys do for Christmas, last Christmas? You know, significant dates. What's your favorite, what's your spouse's favorite restaurant? You know, stuff like that. Most of the time they said, where did you go to your honeymoon? Where did you after you got married? No, that's what it was. After you got married, where did you go? Did you go eat somewhere after you got married? Did you go somewhere? Most of them say no, they didn't go anywhere. Oh, we went to eat at McDonald's or Burger King. That was such a that was such an overused answer. It's an, I mean, I understand some people, they don't have the funds to go to a nice restaurant, but at least go to, I don't know, Golden Corral or something. I don't know what, but come on, you're gonna go to a McDonald's or a Burger King after you get married? No, that's, yeah, that's an obvious red flag. And I mean, so yeah, so anyways.
Why did you decide to leave USCIS? And how long did you work there?
I worked there, so from July 2013 to November 2021. So I left after a couple of years of trying to leave to get a transfer to my parents in South Florida. I kept on getting denied like 4 years in a row. My parents are in their mid 80s, and I supplied just a bunch of paperwork, medical records, all kinds of stuff, dementia, and all kinds of other things, showing that my parents need me, and we couldn't afford a living nurse or something like that. So I was having to fly down at least like twice a month, on the weekends, and spending crazy money to go make sure that they were okay. So after years of applying for a hardship transfer, they don't care. They kept on denying me, and they don't have to tell you why they're denying you. They just flat out deny you, and you just have to put up with it. So after about 4 years of doing that and being denied, it was time to go. My parents are a priority, and now I do immigration, but I do it for different immigration offices for lawyers this time. So now I'm working on the other side. Instead of trying to deny people, I'm trying to actually help them with their processes.
So how many applications would an officer process in a day or a week? What will be sort of the daily routine or operation of an officer, aside from the interviews for, attempting to detect fraud that you described? What other sort of responsibilities do they have?
Yeah, so each day we would go in and we would get what's called a bundle, which is basically a pile of cases. So on residency days, it could have been anywhere from 7 to 9 cases. And then again, one of these cases could have been a couple boxes worth of files. Um, and but so yeah, so usually on residency days, it would be anywhere from 7 to 9 interviews. And then on naturalization days, um, that would be for the people interviewing for citizenship. They would be they would that'd be 30 minutes, I believe. So it was like 45 minutes, and then 30 minutes would be the naturalization interviews, and there would be like 12 interviews per day usually for the naturalization interviews, since they were easier and quicker.
Is the individual officer liable for each case, or do they have
Yeah, yeah, they are. Yeah, you would have to, if there's something came up against you, you would have to go to court yourself. And I mean, you'd still be protected by an attorney at USCIS, but yeah, you're still liable.
So if somebody gets stamped, um, is there any way that can be reversed or changed? Let's say that an officer approves an application, but there seems to be something wrong later. What happens
Yeah,
there?
that happens all the time. Happens all the time. Many times there would be people that were um well, for this is, I guess, a small example. There would be people that were scheduled for naturalization ceremonies. They would on the naturalization ceremonies, it's ceremonies that they would go to get their certificates, their naturalization certificates, and become citizens. But many times the individuals, the applicants would get there, and somebody would we would kind of have like a quality assurance person review their applications and make sure that they were actually eligible for um, to get their citizenship that day. Many times officers made mistakes, all kinds of different mistakes, and then on that day they'd be like, hey, you know what, like, I'm sorry, but there was a mistake and the officer made. You're actually not eligible for citizenship at this time. We're gonna have to re-interview you, or maybe on that day, maybe there was a small error or a clerical error. Um, and then they would have to get rescheduled, and they wouldn't get rescheduled for months. I've seen people get rescheduled over a year. I actually had a family member myself. They got scheduled like a year and a half after, but they canceled they had to cancel their interview because they're out of the country. They were going to be out of the country, and they didn't get rescheduled for another year and a half. and that's a normal occurrence. It's pretty messed up.
Is there any specific quota for you to deny certain number of applications? If so, why?
So we never got a specific quota per se, but there's these analysts that basically they keep track of all of our approvals, all of our fraud referrals, all of our denials. So they actually have these percentages, and they would send to our supervisors. So if we don't meet these percentages regularly, then it would show on our reviews. Like we would get poorly quarterly reviews, or so yeah, it would reflect poorly on us. So we didn't necessarily get quotas, but we did have to do it, to deny a certain amount, do a certain amount of fraud referrals, do a certain amount of approvals. Definitely, yeah.
How does it work at the border? Why is it that they let some people through and don't let others through? And how does that work? And what sort of rights
Yeah,
does
no.
a foreigner or alien have in this sort of scenario?
So that's kind of above my, it's a completely different agency. So these are Customs and Border Protection officers. They're completely different training. So a lot of times it's out of their hands. It's not really up to them whether a person stays or goes. Most of the time it's just, policies in place. So like I said, if automatically, if they say, hey, you know what, I'm gay, I'm getting persecuted in my country, boom, automatic, let them through, and they get to apply for asylum. The same thing, they have a child with them, automatic asylum. So it's not really up to the officers most of the time. It's kind of out of their hands.
If somebody gets let through on the basis of asylum because they have children with them, what happens then? What happens
So
next?
usually they'll get, well, most of these people, they have family members in the States. So they get left to do whatever they want. They just need to, usually they'll be like, okay, well, after leaving CBP, they'll be given an alien number, and they'll be given a date to report to ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And usually, if many times ICE will have them report, let's say, like, could be once a month, could be once every 6 months. It could be just ICE giving them a telephone. That's actually a normal thing now, that ICE gives them a cellular phone, and they just need to pick up and answer whenever ICE calls. Or, if maybe they're deemed to be a flight risk, or maybe they're deemed to be a little bit dangerous or something like that. I don't know. And then maybe ICE decides, hey, you know what? I actually need these people to come see me in person. So then they would have to, kind of like a parole officer type of thing. But I've seen some people that have to just report once a year in person, or just pick up the phone. And then after being let go, they'll go and stay with family or whatever. And then they'll find an attorney, an immigration attorney, that will take on their asylum case. And then it's just a matter of waiting 6 or so months. After 6 or so months, after 6 or so months of applying for asylum, then they'll be eligible for a work permit. And then that work permit's usually good for, I think, like 2 years, I believe. And so then that's it. They have 2 years to work legally, to get their license. They'll get a social security number. They'll be paying taxes. So yeah, they'll be pretty much like just they're legal for 2 years, and then they'll just have to renew again, and they'll usually in the cases of asylum, they'll renew over and over and over again, because again, these asylum cases take so long. So yeah, they'll be working in the States legally for years, until eventually the immigration judge is able to get to their case and adjudicate the case.
Are you familiar with any human trafficking cases?
So those are T visas. Usually again, I think those are usually done by, those might have been done by the service center, or possibly even asylum officers, because there's immigration officers and then there's asylum officers. So they work under USCIS, Homeland Security, but asylum officers go through a more specialized training to deal with these asylum cases. So I think they're the ones that probably usually deal with the the T visas, which are the trafficking visas. Yeah.
And are you familiar with any non-immigration visa stories about abuse or victims?
So we dealt with VAWAs, which is victims of domestic violence. That's something that we dealt with normally. So basically, and there's a lot of fraud with that as well. So that's basically it'll be a citizen, and this could be a citizen spouse or a citizen mother or a citizen child, and they have been abusing their family member. So let's say a U.S. citizen marries a non-U.S. citizen or non-resident, and then that U.S. citizen just is violent. It could be verbally, could be physically. Maybe they, you know what, I'm not going to let you out. You're here with me, like I'm a U.S. citizen. You need to listen to me, or else I'm going to have you deported. So yeah, some people are just kind of held hostage. Their papers are taken away, their passports are taken away, or yeah, just physical abuse. And then eventually these individuals will call the police, and they'll get restraining orders, and then they usually will contact an attorney and will file a VAWA. They'll file a VAWA petition, which will then allow them to self-petition themselves. Instead of having somebody petition for them, they self-petition as domestic violence survivor, I guess. So they'll be eligible to apply for residency because of this violence against them. It could have been maybe a son or a daughter that's a U.S. citizen or a resident, and they were mistreating their father or their mother. That happens a lot also. So then the father and the mother will kind of separate. They'll call the cops on their children, and they'll be eligible for residency through the VAWA process. So it's an I-360 application. And so yeah, it happens with both children, parents, spouses. So, and that happens a lot. And there's a lot of fraud that happens with it as well, because a lot of people will claim that their U.S. citizen spouse or U.S. resident spouse abused them, when a lot of times there was no abuse, but because they want an immigration benefit, they'll claim this abuse. So there's a lot of fraud there as well.
Wow. Okay. We have a lot to unpack still. So I think that we're going to need to have a round two. We have plenty more questions to ask. Good. So thank you so much for joining us, Julio.
Sure.
Been very informative, and for the next time, we're definitely going to have a lot more questions to ask. And I've enjoyed talking with you. And yeah, we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Me as well. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So that's it for now for the Daily Show. Have a good weekend. Take care.